Where's the line for you in terms of calling something heresy or even calling someone a heretic in a non-bludgeoning way? Well, there are those things for you where, it's a clear transgression.
Well, I think that, let me put it this way. I saw a quote from Andy Stanley. Now, I'm not a student of Andy Stanley. He seems to be getting himself into some trouble lately. And a statement, he made a statement that, we need to focus on the resurrection, not on the authority of Scripture, something like that, which is, to me, I think you're setting up a false opposition. Why can't we have both? I think that's a ridiculous statement. But am I saying, there are people who would say he's a heretic, right, and are saying that. So I would say no, but if you go down a certain road, at some point you or people that follow you will wind up in heresy. It's not that you're in it now. It's not technically heretical to have a different, less high view of Scripture than you and I would have. It's what is the consequence of that? If you are propagating a weak view of Scripture because you don't like a doctrine that's in Scripture and you're planning to ditch it, and the only way you've got of ditching it is by weakening the authority of Scripture, where are you headed? And that's what I look at in people. Like Rob Bell started down a road a number of years ago, and he wound up in an apostasy, really, a denial of the faith, as far as I understand, unless I'm incorrect.
At least in its orthodox form, for sure.
Right, and that's heresy. If you move out of the realm of Christian orthodoxy in terms of the fundamental doctrines of the faith, the divinity of Christ, the incarnation, the virgin birth, the justification by faith, and so on. If you move outside of those, then you're not an Orthodox Christian anymore. You would not have been accepted as such in the first century church, and you shouldn't be in the 20th century church. And there's 2,000 years of, but there are a ton of other things that, you and I might turn our nose up and say, well, I don't agree with that. I couldn't go down that road. I think it might even create a problem for you, but I'm not going to say it's heresy. And
I do think, though, that there are things that we will address or face in this generation that previous generations would not have had to face because the surrounding culture didn't force them to face them. So, for example, people often like to tote the fact that Jesus apparently never directly spoke about homosexuality. And, you can approach that conversation a couple of different ways in regards to Jesus's words about marriage, and I believe it's Matthew 19. But the fact is that Jesus never expressly spoke to two men in a sexual relationship with one another, nor two women. But that's because he was speaking primarily to Jews who would have thought such a relationship to be sinful, and therefore they weren't broaching him with those kinds of questions, and he wasn't addressing that kind of error with them. He was more concerned with the hypocritical Pharisee who was caught up in adultery in his mind and his heart, even though he was seeing himself as better than the person who was caught up in the act physically. He wants to address that problem. But you can't say that Jesus, therefore, was okay with homosexual sex. You can't say that. That would be completely disingenuous to a biblical perspective on family, sex, and marriage. A biblical perspective.
And the reason for that is simply that Jesus consistently presented himself as under the authority of the Scriptures.
Just as I was about to say, a perspective that Jesus himself held. So there's going to be certain issues that we face that the first century or second century church isn't going to face. That I do think forces us to ask the question, does this make them heretical or are they still orthodox? Like for me, you cannot put a rainbow flag on your church and say that we are still an orthodox church.